My name is Christopher Lindsay. I'm Vice President of Government Relations for IAPMO, we're International Trade Association in the plumbing industry, and I'm based in Washington, D.C., working on legislative and regulatory issues for our industry. Glad to be joined today by two of my colleagues from the Millennium Water Alliance, John Sparks and Jason Lopez. Just to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're talking about today, we're going to give it, we thought it's a special year in the United States, give you a little bit of an election preview and what to expect. We're also going to be diving into U.S. WASH appropriations, how the U.S. funds WASH services, where we're at, what are the impacts that the election might have on our policy and advocacy moving forward. We have a new theme that we're addressing in this year's session for those who have joined previous years, looking at growing the WASH portfolio in the global climate financing effort. Finally, we'll close out by looking at a couple other policy points that are developing, which we'd love to get you all involved with, or at least make you aware of. So we recognize this is a lunch session, so please enjoy your lunch. Don't worry about planking. This is really kind of more of an informal session, and we're just excited to have you here. I thought I would start off as we get into the election preview by giving you a little bit of indigestion. As you know, we have the big three, the House, the Senate, the President are all being elected this year. It's a big election for us in the United States. As we look at the two campaigns, throughout the early parts, they really have kind of dug in on their top policy issues. First off, both sides have really dug in on economic policy and foreign policy. That's kind of been key themes that we've seen from both of the campaigns. Now they do that because it's an issue that actually really splits down the middle for both their supporters. They're roughly even on both the sides in terms of how it breaks out which party people think will handle those issues the best. The Harris campaign, as you know, or if you've been following the elections at all, is really campaigning hard on reproductive rights, following the reversal of Roe versus Wade. And then Trump is really targeting kind of immigration as a primary issue. So what does it mean if and environment? Unfortunately, both those topics have kind of taken a back seat in the campaign. However, we would anticipate that if Harris were to win, it really would be a continuation of some of the things that we've seen thus far with the Biden administration. We would probably see, they look to strengthen regulations, particularly as it relates to water quality topics, such as lead, PFAS. We would think we also see kind of an uplifting of efforts on environmental justice, such as like the Justice 40 initiative. And we would certainly see kind of more protecting the investments that have been made through some of the big infrastructure laws that have been passed in the United States. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act. What does it mean if the Trump administration wins? We would likely see, there's been hints that they would want to roll back some of the investments that have been made through those bipartisan laws. We also looked at them to try and roll back some of the EPA's regulatory scheme. For those that follow kind of water quality in the United States, the lead and copper rule was just passed. Certainly there's been new regulations on PFAS that the administration would target. And they would probably, depending on how House and Senate shakes up, there would probably be a big push to limit discretionary spending. And so some efforts, depending on your individual program, there might be an effort to scale some of that back. One of the key themes, just as part of this election preview, is that really all three, the House, the Senate, the White House, are really up for grabs right now. So there's possibilities for one party to win total unified control of all three, and there's very good possibilities to have a divided government. So depending on what your take is, there's good and bad with both. But we encourage you to get out to vote, because this election, your voice would really matter. Just real quick, the breakdown of the kind of electoral college. You can see it takes 270 electoral votes to win the White House. There's 93 of those electoral votes that are really viewed as a toss-up. And so this election, really can go. Trump's up in, several swing states. Now, Trump has historically been viewed as, as underperforming in polls and usually does a little higher in the election. So if that trend holds true, we may have a little bit greater lead in some of those states. We also are seeing reports every day that the gender divide, support for liberals or support for Democrats is widening. More women are actually going to be voting this year for Democrats than they've ever before versus Republicans. We're also seeing some reports that independents are finally shifting from leaning Republican to now leaning Democrat, and that maybe African-American, male support for Kamala Harris is softening. So there's lots of trends at play, and we really won't know probably until, election night and how, who got out the vote and how it's all going to play out. Moving quickly to the Senate, so this is the current balance of power in the United States Senate. The Democrats hold a slim majority, and that includes 3 independents that caucus, with the Democrats right now. So it's really a kind of a 1-seat, swing here. Here's kind of the forecast right now for what we anticipate. Now, the Democrats are at a disadvantage in the Senate. Of all 3 races, this is one that we can likely see that really things would have to go the right way for the Democrats in order for them to maintain a majority. And the reason being is 3 states that Trump won that are currently democratically held Senate seats, they're up for re-election. Those 3 seats are Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Yes, okay, it's already red. West Virginia, Joe Manchin is retiring, and we anticipate that we pretty much call right now that race will likely go Republican. So that already begins to swings us to a 50-50 race. John Tester, so that Democrat should be blue, or Montana should be blue, but John Tester's really up against a tough candidate, a former Navy SEAL, successful businessman who's up competing against. And so, depending on how other races we're watching in Texas, Arizona, Florida, Wisconsin, depending on how some of those play out, this it could be a good night for the Republicans, or it could be basically a 50-50. Government, and then whoever wins the White House will take the Senate. House, again, this has really been an interesting Congress because there's been such narrow majorities. It takes 218 to win, so you can see what the split is currently. So the Democrats really need to win a net 4 seats. Now, unlike the Senate, where only a third of the Senate's up for re-election, for the House, whereas it's, Civics 101, everyone's up for re-election, because they do it every 2 years. There's 27 members who are retiring, 18 are running for other offices, and then 5 states have redrawn their boundaries. And so their districts are kind of, the members of Congress running in those districts are running in new districts, essentially. So the makeup's a little unclear. So there's a lot at play. Again, Democrats only need a net of 4 to, take control. Republicans are really focusing on widening their majority. Democrats focusing obviously on retaking the House. Last year, in the last cycle, 11 of the seats were decided by less than 1% of the vote. And so that's where you can, and if you went up to 2%, that number obviously only increases. So these are really slim victories, and, Democrats are feeling that they can overturn it. Republicans obviously are hoping they can, strengthen some of those races. Anyway, of this, almost over 20 seats are currently considered are toss-ups. So there's a lot of play. With that, I'm going to shift now. We're going to shift directions. I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to talk a little bit about what Congress has been doing on WASH funding this year. We're going to talk a little bit about what the impacts of the election might be with a Republican or a Democrat, and we'll go from there. But the bottom line, again, get out and vote. Your vote really matters. It's going to really turn the direction of our government moving forward. All right, John.
Christopher. That was pretty good. So long time ago, I managed a congressional campaign that nobody gave us a chance, for real, gave us a chance to snowball in a hot place of winning. We lost by 314 votes out of 88,000. So just if you have friends or relatives and they say, well, I'm still not convinced. If only 300 people had shown up that day to vote, we would have won. And that whoever won that seat, we knew, and this is true, would hold it for the next 20 years. And the guy who did win, he did hold it for another 20 years, because that was a district near where I grew up in, and people don't change their minds about anything. So it's going to stay different. So it is a big deal. People really do need to get out and vote, not just sit at home and yell at the TV, which I've been doing a lot of lately. But when I get back home on my own time, I am going to go out and do stuff. So everybody should do it. That's my whole thing. That's as close to being partisan as I'm going to get. Well, maybe not, but I'd love to get more, but yeah. Okay. So as Chris had discussed, and we'll talk about a little bit more on a couple of things, all depends on that day of dread, November 5th. So for several reasons, arguably more so than this election than any time in a U.S. history, but definitely any time in the last several elections, it really depends. We can't really say much of what's going to happen, what we're going to be able to do about water and sanitation with Congress and the administration, because it's not only that it'll be different if one side wins the other, it will be radically different. This is the difference now. So, however, that doesn't automatically follow, and this is the point I want to drive home, and could you do the slide? Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. There we go. The reason I put this up here, this shows how the House and Senate have gone in their separate bills on funding international water and sanitation through USAID over the last several years. The reason I bring this up, this is not the final enacted amounts, but this is where they started. So obviously the Senate, the House, there are times they've been far apart, they got together, far apart. These are different years. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Right. Okay, so the reason it's just sort of to drive home the point. Don't assume that Democratic majorities mean favorable or support for international assistance all the time. It doesn't. It often does in the general environment. They tend to be more receptive to the idea. They tend to be generally supportive. But a lot of times, on the watch number, the Republicans, when they've been in control, have been quite good. And in fact, this last go around last year, we loved the Republican number. It was great. It had the language you wanted. It was the amount we wanted. It was the Democrats who were the problem out of nowhere. So just don't assume that it's always one party or the other. It isn't. So slide 2, where's the, oh yeah, good, thank you. So here's just a little rundown of where the spending has been the last few years. I don't know if everybody can see it. Can you see it on this side? Okay. You probably can't see that, but anyway, I'll explain what that is. So where we are right now, we're at 451 million. And that's what we got approved just last year. This year, the year we're in right now, this is October, this is the beginning of the federal fiscal year. The fiscal year 24 expired at the end of last month. So right now we're under, as usual, you've heard this before, even if you don't follow politics that much, you've heard this expression, continuing resolution. It's Congress's way of doing a temporary extension of the spend until they can pass the real bills that fund the government for the full year. So we had $451 million in FY24. The reason we think right now we're going to get the 451 again is because finally both chambers agreed on that already. So our amount is a done deal, which is great for us because we can goof off at conferences like this instead of being back in Washington all the time. Although right now they're not even there because they're out running for election. That's all they care about right now. Okay, but so we are going to get this is a near certainty we're going to get 451 million again, which is in the big picture is a victory. Even though this represents the first decrease in what happened there. I don't know what happened there. Oh, there it is. In 20 years. Yeah. So even longer than I've had this job, which is almost 15 years, all the time I've had this job, we've gone up and up and up. You're welcome. But last year we got a cut, which really I took personally. So we got a cut, but not a bad cut, because what the Senate committee had decided to do, without anybody really knowing it, I just want to tell you without getting into too much detail. A new staffer came on, and he looked at the numbers, and he was saying, gosh, those guys always get increases or stay level. And then he looked at a few other accounts, same thing. He kind of got the idea, this is just happening automatically, routinely. This needs to be adjusted. So he, he submitted a number that was significantly less. 1/3 cut, which is massive. Nobody knew. We had 24 hours to scramble and try to get other people in the committee, on the staff, the appropriations committee, to see what was going on. Well, some of them did, some of them didn't, but you know, if you understand how Senate markup works, it's very much sort of like a consensual thing, and everybody's just sort of rolling along. It's a huge bill. You know, we're talking about overall like a $70 billion bill. We're a small piece. So anyway, it was passed, and the cut was in their version, and we were shocked. Now, these people are not anti-WASH. In fact, they've been extremely supportive in the past, but he felt there needed, not just us, but some other accounts at USAID, he said, needed adjustment. Or as he put it, needed right sizing. That's a word that people love to use. I don't know, it needs to be right sized. Well, what's right? Well, he said it was right. So basically how we dealt with that, we scrambled and basically got them to agree eventually to the House number. The Republican House had approved continuing the same level of spending, which we liked. So they came closer to it. So we did get a cut, but we didn't get a cut of 1/3, we got a cut of a little more than 5%, which ain't too bad. So this is where we are right now, $451 million. I still am personally bummed by it, but that's the way it is. This picture, by the way, we had a big event, which was very successful, thanks in part to our partners, IAPMO, and a few other organizations, in Washington last spring, in March at World Water Day. This is Congressman Earl Blumenauer, who's been our champion in the House for many, many years. He's actually been the relentless fighter for water and sanitation. He's retiring at the end of this year, which is a bummer. We need to replace him with another champion. He's staying with Patty Simon, the widow of Senator Paul Simon, who was the senator 20 years ago, who was the real leader on water and sanitation, after whom obviously the Senator Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act of 2005 and the Senator Paul Simon Water for the World Act of 2014 is named. And that's Laura Kohler, who is from the Kohler Company, one of Chris's companies, and IAPMO, the plumbing company based in Wisconsin, and they helped us put on this big show. We had 100 people there, congressional staff, Administrator Smith Power came, and it was a great event where we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the passage of the Water for the World Act in 2014. So, that's it for the slide. The purpose of showing all of this is just to show you that basically we've been going up and up and up. As the Senate staffer said to me, John, it was inevitable when you have success so often you start to become a target. And so we became a bit of a target. So now, let's see. Okay, one thing is that one problem we always have, frequently have, I should say, is that while our number is good many times from the House, what else they do to foreign aid overall is terrible. I mean, it's horrible. They gut programs right and left. They put on the severe restrictions, huge cuts in this last bill imposed by the House Republicans. It puts us in the awkward position of being happy with what we get, and our friends in the rest of the development community, in this brilliantly drawn chart up here by me, our colleagues who are not WASH organizations, don't have WASH programs, but who we work with quite a bit on lobbying, these guys, because of that money, and these guys, the White House, National Security Council, the State Department, and USAID itself, in a sense. We work with all of these folks. So we have this kind of delicate balance where we have, the House bill is really great for us, but it's terrible for everybody else. So we say, our stuff is good, that still needs to be kept, but obviously the rest of the bill, not so good. But then one Republican staffer said to me, we don't get any love from you guys, even though we keep helping you. I said, well, look at the rest of what you're doing, So we are always in this little bit of a situation, and I think that's going to continue for some time, regardless of what happens in the election. Let's see, but we take great pains to be very bipartisan in our outreach, and that's the reason why, in a nutshell, why is WASH done so well, and a few other accounts at USAID have too, but we're pretty consistent. That's because we've had a history of being extremely bipartisan in our outreach in Congress, and also because the issue itself is popular with the American people. Water and sanitation is an intuitively acceptable and supportable thing for most people. They say if we're going to help people or do something good in the world, that's a no-brainer. So we have the benefit of that issue, of that belief in that issue. But that didn't spare us the cut that we got last year anyway. So, I guess we're running close to time here. So, let's see, I'm gonna skip over a couple things here. Okay, so basically, where we are now is, well, we're at the 451. We do work on other things besides giving money for you guys. We've been pretty successful at it. I think we will continue to be doing that to a great degree, but we do work on a few other pieces. But just to wrap up, I just say there are other pieces of legislation of interest that come around. And in the last Congress, a few small bills, I won't go into detail on it because we don't have time. The bills all die at the end of the Congress, and Congress ends in December. They're going to come back after the election and vote, presumably, because the continuing resolution I mentioned before, the temporary extension on spending, expires in December. So they're going to do this thing again, where they do what they should have done months ago, which is pass the final appropriations bills. They will do that, and that'll be the end of this Congress. And the new Congress comes in January, and who knows what the heck's going to happen then. We have no idea what's going to happen. It depends on the majorities. It all depends on the majority, because they run the show. So there was a bill on Washington healthcare facilities that was introduced. It's a small bill. It doesn't fund anything. It just simply calls on USAID to do some more analysis and evaluation and reporting on Washington healthcare facility support in their programs. We support that bill. That'll probably be reintroduced next year, and a couple other smaller bills that I just don't need to highlight right now. So even if those bills do get reintroduced and are move forward in new Congress, it all depends on the election, whether or not they even move into committee, let alone get voted on for final action. And the administration, I don't need to say any more about. You kind of covered that, so I think I'm done out. Cool. Is this when we want to do our cue? So for both Chris and me, position, any questions at this point about what we've covered? Because we're going to move to a different section altogether. Where did Jason just leave and leave the whole section?
He'll be back.
Okay, I was getting panicky. I said, where did he go? I recruited the dude. Where is he going? Okay, well, Jason's going to talk about something a bit different and I think very interesting to everybody. But any questions? We'll take some questions. You can take questions, and if you're close to the microphone, go to it. If not, we will get to you and we'll repeat it. Make sure that there are people online, presumably listening to this or will listen to this later. So we want to make sure they can hear. So, here it's coming over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Rod Beadle with CARE. Just to explain a little bit on the $451 million, how prescriptive is that and how it's spent and by whom? Is that $451 million that a certain amount goes to aid, a certain amount goes to agriculture, or? All wash.
451 is all water, sanitation, and hygiene as defined under the Senator Paul Simon Water for the World Act of 2020. And so it's all wash. And the way it has to be spent, there are some little loopholes on this, but basically the way it has to be spent, the Act, we helped write, basically, required USAID to settle on some criteria for naming high priority countries. And right now there's a list of about 21, I think it is, 21, 22 high priority countries. USAID goes back and revises that list each year. I think if we ever get around to changing the Act, we might give them a little more time because every year is a little bit too often. But high priority countries, and that's where most of the WASH spending is supposed to occur. Some WASH money does get, I get criticized when I use the word diverted, but let's just say it gets moved to countries that are not on a high priority list according to criteria. And the criteria have to do with impact, likely impact of the investment, transformational capacity, and the capacity of the countries to absorb and to work with the funding, and need. That's the big thing, the needs index. In other words, the reason we put that in there is we were concerned that certain countries might get more funding, more attention than maybe the needs index might indicate they should get. Frankly, we're thinking mostly about, not only, but mostly about sub-Saharan Africa. That's where the need is the greatest. There's need obviously in other parts of the world, but there are a few countries that are called, quote, that's not in the Act, but it's done anyway because administrations do this thing, strategic priority countries. Lebanon, Jordan, West Bank, Gaza. And you know, the reason they're up there, obviously there's need. I mean, there's no question about that. But the amount of money is, some would argue, is disproportionate, given the need, if you're going by needs index. So basically, the money is prescribed about how it can be done. It has to meet certain standards. It is basically overseen by the Global Water Center, excuse me, the water. Right.
The Office of Water?
Yeah, the Office of Water is what I'm trying to say. They have a longer name, but anyway, at USAID, so this is USAID administered, and it's done through, obviously, through the missions. Sorry, I wandered way off of your question.
No, that's a good answer.
Okay, cool. If Rod says it's good, it's good. Okay. More before we move on, because we're going to go on to a little bit different subject, but is there anything about any of that, or I just threw this up here, I don't expect people to seriously see this or think about it, but basically, if you really are unfamiliar with what we're talking about, some of you are not brought up in this country and maybe not used to kind of thinking about how things are divided, but the Capitol, the Congress is where the money is basically comes from. The White House, these other agencies are who we work with. We're down here, NGOs and contractors as WASH implementers, and we also work with obviously research institutions, and we work with funders. Many of you represent funders here. And then the rest of the larger development community, which I talked about, which are the big multi-portfolio development organizations, international NGOs and so forth. And we also talk sometimes with the UN and other multilaterals. I probably should have written that there. But anyway, we do work also on other things that don't have to do with Congress and don't have to do with USAID. So advocacy is much bigger than that. So yeah, Darren, please. And this is for Chris and me, so it's not just me.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. John, Eric Taylor from BAI. I wondered if you could comment on two things that might impact on WASH funding going forward. I mean, I have a perspective on it, but I'm interested in your perspective as insiders. One is Project 2025, some commentary, the published commentary that we've seen there. What do you think the implications of that might be? And the second is, I don't know if there's anybody from USAID here, but we're sort of tracking the rise of the power and the influence of the chief economist within USAID and this influence of increasing priority around return on investment. What does that mean for WASH versus other development activities or other development sectors within USAID itself?
Want to start?
Sure. You know, so obviously we're looking at, you know, some of the ramifications of like the Project 2025 agenda. You know, for us, I think it goes back to the broader picture that if certain influences in the Republican Party, you know, were to take power, there is more of a limiting of the federal government. However, you know, as John pointed out, WASH and water and sanitation has historically done well with both parties. Now, it's not that Republicans have been particularly good about, you know, increasing funding. It's just that maybe they also don't have the other priorities, like with climate, you know, on the plate. And so there's not those competitions. So, you know, I would expect even with with, you know, certain, if the Republican Party were to come power, certain elements will really start to push through the Project 2025, you know, government doesn't get reshaped overnight. I would, and this doesn't get reshaped in 4 years either. So I would anticipate that we would still weather fairly well under the water and sanitation account. Now, on the, you know, kind of the rise of the chief economist, I mean, for us, you know, also I come with an industry voice. You know, return on investment's always been, you know, an important aspect, you know, of what we do. And I think that, you know, we as a WASH community have done a fairly good job of showing, you know, how investments in WASH, you know, continue, you know, to pay a dividend as compared to some of those other, you know, competing priorities. I think we're going to have to continue to articulate that case. I know that's something even domestically, as you talked about, you know, with Dig Deep, that's something that we're looking at as we look at WASH in high income countries. You know, putting numbers to that. Actually, what does it mean when we invest? What does it actually do to that community? And that's a story I think we're going to have to even better articulate, particularly to our allies, you know, up on the Hill. If Republicans do take, you know, the Senate, we probably at this point would anticipate they are, and regardless of what shapes in the House, that there are going to be those elements that we're going to have to address that concern, and within the agency too. But I'd be curious to hear your kind of thoughts on that.
That's a good answer. I don't have a lot to add. I don't know. I haven't read the section of 2025 where they get into foreign policy. I can't say much about it. I I figure I will read it if November 5th goes a certain way. Even though, now, Trump said he's never read it. That I believe. Because it's like, what, 40 pages? Yeah, I would do that.
I'm not gonna comment.
I just did. So, and your other question, I think what he said is about as fair as we can say. None of this stuff gets changed overnight. There is a little bit of truth, and a thread of truth in the deep state. So things do take a while. But at the same time, just remember the previous Trump administration. Every year we had to fight them from cutting USAID by 1/3. Everything. Everything. Why should it be any different in the future?
By the same token, did it ever get cut?
Because only there were some Republicans, just enough, in the House to say, this is crazy, we're not doing this. In the election, some of those Republicans aren't around anymore. You know, a lot of them have retired or in the process of retiring. And so this is the issue. It really depends, I hate to say this, it just depends on what happens November 5th, completely. Totally. All right, any more?
Question?
Yeah, please. Speak up. Here, I can do it, I got it.
I'm just interested in how this quantum compares with other bilateral donors and multilaterals, and whether you have any, like, do you coordinate at all with what other countries or other groups like the EU are advocating for their own governments?
Yes, when you say you.
You as advocates and.
Oh, do we? No, because we're all working on our own thing. I was talking with some folks, maybe even here today from Switzerland, for example. They're facing some cuts on foreign aid right now, and we were talking about that. There are other countries, well, this is famous or infamously what's been going on in Britain the last 3 or 4 years, right? So, no, we don't, we share their pain, but we don't coordinate the actual work, because really, when it comes to legislators and governments in individual countries, they kind of really, when it comes to spending their money, they care about who in their country, what they say, rather than what outsiders say. So if that's what you meant, we don't coordinate on that. The coordination that may happen to the degree that it does between USAID and other agencies, other aid agencies, I think there's been more of that over the last several years. There's always been an argument in the aid community about how much donor, if we can call it that, coordination there should be. I favor a lot, but it hasn't really happened yet. Did I get to your question at all? Okay. Do we have any lessons or ideas or brilliant solutions that we could offer to other advocates in other countries that they would benefit from? I don't know. I doubt it. Every country is so specific with its own, but let's come back to one thing, especially in democracies, relationships, which is why it is frustrating at times for us to work with some people in the agencies that get rotated out all the time. But in Congress, a lot of those people stay a long time. So we do develop relationships, and we have a great relationship, and I've had this for 15 years with a staffer who really manages the appropriations for our issue in the House of Representatives. She loves us. So it kind of helps. All right, any more? We're right on schedule. Jason, are you ready to do your number?
Hey, John.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, was there a question? Oh, I didn't mean to overlook you, go ahead.
Just like one more question, just to add to that, is just, I mean, do you have a sense of, thanks, do you just have a sense of what like the US allocation is compared to these other countries? Like, do we have a sense of globally how much the
Oh,
US
yeah.
government is putting in compared to FCDO and?
Yeah. Well, speaking of Switzerland, that's the voice of Switzerland right there, that very particular case.
Very American person, yes.
So, well, actually, I was wanting to put out the chart that showed that, okay? And, well, I didn't though, because I didn't get around to making the darn thing. So I will do that, actually, I will do it, we'll put it on the MWA website and share it with her. But in general, the US, my understanding is that USAID itself is still the biggest unilateral, still the single donor in development in general. And I think it's true in water and sanitation as well. Is that right? You know, our friend from state? Okay. Well, I think it is. As far as comparison with other countries, the usual suspects, have usually been, obviously the Netherlands, Germany, Britain, several others, and Canada, I think quite a bit. Japan has quietly done some not a whole lot, I guess, but anyway, so how do we compare? I think that still USAID, also because it's, to be honest, because it's the United States, the content, the language, the priorities of the actual spending, the way implementation is designed. What USAID does, for better or worse, goes a long way to influencing what others do. So even if you're not, and this is my last point, even if you're not working for a USAID grantee, or you're working for one of those rare NGOs that never wants a USAID grant, or maybe one of the more to do, because getting USAID grant is a lot of hoops, right? It's a lot of work to maintain those grants, but there are reasons for that. Even if you don't, the fate of USAID directly affects your own bottom line, because it's the whole pool, and it is the leader in the pool. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a more specific answer for you, and if I'd done the chart, I could just point to the chart. Okay, we're ready to move on. Thank you for all those questions, appreciate it. Jason, you were introduced before. This is Jason Lopez, our Deputy Director, and newly minted environmental expert.
Hello, everybody. So we talked about what's being done on Capitol Hill and with the government and stuff, but now we're going to talk a little bit more about what we can do as WASH people. So yeah, advocating for WASH and climate resilience. Climate is resilience. I got a little thing over there, so it's, these things are synonymous. Remember that. And we can argue about it after this. But yeah, no, also keep in mind when we do this session, this is very much meant to start a discussion, and we can talk about details. If you have good suggestions or anecdotes from your experience, please be prepared to share them as well. All right, so just a quick here, when we talk about water, just in general, all my presentations, I'm gonna start using this slide. When we say water, this is what we're talking about. We don't just mean literally water, we mean that it touches all of these things, and you basically can't do these other things without water. So right now, there's about, in 2023, there was climate funding or financing exceeded $600 billion. About 5% of that went to WASH. These are very rough numbers, by the way. It was really difficult to find any good numbers on this, but these are roughly 5% of the funding went to WASH. 10% went to adaptation. Well, the child it probably includes some WASH in there as well. Energy and agriculture were the two biggest ones. The moral of the story is WASH gets very little funding in the climate and resilience space. And you know, let's talk about what we as a group can do about this. Also, an example would be the USAID's the Presidential Preparedness and Resilience Act, right? The USAID, if you go to their webpage, it says this thing is focusing on agriculture and WASH. It's like two big buckets there. 5% of the money is going to WASH. So, yeah. It was hard to find that fact, by the way.
Hard to mean, it was hard to actually discover.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a lot of trouble with it, but it's about 5% right now. So what are we gonna do? We need to do advocacy. So there's advocacy. We already talked about what we're doing here, and as MWA and our partners. But we also need to do just some external engagement, right? So we need to engage with donors and stakeholders and talk about, WASH funding, why it's important, how WASH integrates, into everything else. We also need to do internal advocacy. So we all need to go talk to our colleagues and explain to them, like, they probably actually don't understand that WASH is part of what they do, and how climate is part of how water and WASH are part of the broader climate strategy. And if they, or if maybe they do know, but they're not thinking about it. So we need to start engaging internally within our organizations. And a big part of that, again, is highlighting the cross-cutting nature of WASH. So how this intersects with agriculture, right? So you can't grow food without water. We need energy for moving water. I think 5% of energy goes to just moving around water. It's also a source of producing water, which relates back to water resource management. Governance, of course, policy, transboundary water. This is all water and governance. Environment, again, resource management. WASH in general is moving uphill. There is no difference between WASH, resource management, and WASH now. This is all one water cycle. And we need to start talking about it that way and getting it through to people that we need to talk about, that this is what it is. And don't forget about solid waste. People forget about, that's a big part of water resource management. Again, climate and resilience, what basically overarching thing we're talking about, the technologies that go with it, health, we all know how important wash is for health, even though people act like you just give people pills and they'll be fine. So yeah, and say even wildlife needs water too, right? And I was gonna give some anecdotes about stories we can tell, but you all know better than I do. You all have the stories in your head of what it means for people to have water. That's why we're all in this conference. But one thing to keep in mind is, when there's a famine and people are hungry, you see people are hungry. You can see that people, like, you'll see images, you'll see the news. You will not see thirsty people. You will never see thirsty people because they either move or they die. So get that across to people. It's hard to, you will not see thirsty people. All right, next one. All right, so opportunities for climate and wash advocacy, right? So one is to start using the indicators that are out there. Some indicators out there already. USAID has mapped their indicators to climate, and it's indicators that you are already using, but you also need to start mapping them to climate as well and reporting on it. There's probably need to create indicators, and there's experts in this conference that would be better suited to do that. But I'm sure that there is a need for climate-specific WASH indicators, and we need to work quickly to start developing those. Again, identify opportunities in existing climate funding, right? So how do you integrate WASH into environmental and agricultural projects? There's also funding like Prepare. So how do you find the Green Climate Fund is out there? There's also there's also results-based financing using carbon credits, which is tout my own horn here. So if you want to know more about that, you can come find me. And also a big part of this is going to be reframing how we talk about our current programming, right? So it's not that we need to necessarily start doing new types and different programming for climate. It's how we talk about what we're already doing. So if you talk about solarization of water systems, that's climate mitigation. And we need to frame it that way. If you're talking about water resource management, that's water resource resilience. Which is the big push here. And resilience goes beyond climate even, because it also has to do with population growth, increased demand for the supply of water, and climate is just a part of that. So resilience has several components to it, climate being the biggest boogeyman in the room here. Again, if you're doing water safety planning, that's also resilience. And again, if you're doing results-based financing, it's pretty great. But yeah, the point is, we need to start associating what we already do with how it impacts resilience and climate. So next steps. So advocate for WASH. In your own strategies, talk to your agricultural counterparts, go sit down with them, make sure they understand how climate relates to all this, to the existing programming. Talk to your CEO, talk to your boss. Try being nice, and if that doesn't work, try being mean. This is important. It has to be done. Basically, we all need to start being advocates. Engage with donors as well. Again, we're saying 5%, how do we talk to donors to say, hey, I see that you're starting to fund more climate work. By the way, are you aware that water is part of the climate? Again, to leverage existing funding. A big one here is prepare for COP 2020 and New York Climate Week 2025, right? So I've been telling everybody, many of your organizations already send, 10 people to COP or something. I want you all to make sure that you're one of those people. Make sure you're planning for it for next year to make sure that you're participating in these conversations. I'll give an example. When a big member of ours at Climate Week, they had a full slate of events, like 2 days worth of events at Climate Week. None of them were water. They just, like, Climate Week, there was like 3 water events the whole time. And there was like 25 health events. Water is getting hit now, we all know it. So I guess one thing I didn't mention was, you know, a lot of the focus on the original funding slide is still on mitigation. So one of the reasons why we're getting maybe left behind a bit is that's still the focus. But, you know, resilience is resilience, and this is gonna happen whether or not they spend all the money on mitigation or not. And we have to make that point to get across to people. We are getting hit now. If I would argue that of all the sectors, we're the ones getting hit by climate change the worst, and no one's recognizing it. So we, you know, bring your passion to your colleagues and let them know. And yeah, okay, keep in touch, stay in communication. There are people who will be attending COP 2024 this year, people who did attend Climate Week. We'd hope to hear back from them, see what they got from it, and how we can start planning for next year to really make a push for WASH to be a part of the conversation. All of the decisions on what's gonna move forward are gonna be happening this year and next year. And if we're not included, we might never be included. So yeah, that's it. And conversation here, questions, comments. Has anybody done any of this on their own? Like anybody started advocating within their organizations or with a donor or something and been successful?
Or unsuccessful.
Or unsuccessful? What'd you hear, you know? Any thoughts?
Thanks. Aidan Cronin from UNICEF. A comment and maybe a suggestion. The comment is that on the indicators there is work happening. There's a session tomorrow morning actually on J&D and GLASS initiative on defining climate resilient WASH indicators. So I think that would be a good session for colleagues maybe to look out for. There is a lot of, and a great presentation, thank you, really enjoyed it. I fully agreed with that we're getting the short end of the stick as the WASH sector. We really need to turn this around quickly. So what is it that we can do together on this? Like, we don't hear our senior leadership in many organizations bringing this to the fore, and we're, I think, collectively as a sector, as equally frustrated as you. So, I mean, can we come around maybe like 5 headline talking points for our senior leadership, some coherent narrative? Because we're all, even if we're saying the same thing, we're all saying it slightly differently, which is an issue.
Yeah.
So the message is getting distorted. So I'm really trying to think, how do we take an action together from this great presentation? Thank you.
No, I think that's a great suggestion. I'm sure there's stuff already out there, but yeah, I think we not only, even if it exists already, we need to get it out into the world, right? So we'll be working on that.
To add to that point, then we gotta get to you. Yeah, we have, who's the we? Who's the we in all these sentences, right? Who is the we? Well, in my case, it's a small group of we's who get together in Washington and talk about this stuff. And the people who are at the organizations who have offices in Washington and do advocacy, watch the Hill, talk to the administration, because a lot of this stuff from federal policy is being driven by the White House. I mean, Joe Biden goes around, has promised, oh, we'll do this on climate change, we'll do this with that. Then word comes back when he gets back, they say, you guys at USAID, the agencies, you've got to find some money to pay for all this stuff that the dude has just promised. And that's what's been happening. That's part of the pressure on the WASH account, to be honest, is climate change, paying for climate change. Well, WASH is part of climate, so there should be a, I hate to use this word, holistic way of dealing with this. But the advocacy groups have not addressed this. This is sort of what Jason and I have been talking about between ourselves and also with a few of our colleagues. Something needs to happen, because unless 3 or 4 or 5 organizations step up and start saying, and it's, sharing information with people through all sorts of venues, over the next few months, short-term months, especially if you're talking about COP26, of course, how the United States does in COP26 depends on November 5th, right? So there's a lot that we need to do, and I think we have been so preoccupied with our defense action on our funding, frankly, that we haven't taken this on yet. But the beautifully framed question and statement is exactly where we need to be. The messaging is nowhere. Nowhere. So we know individually, we have ideas about what water and climate mean, why it's important. But anybody outside of this kind of room or conference, they don't know what we're talking about unless we define what that is and make it repeatable. Let's do what the Republicans do so well in elections, make it repeatable, whether that's true or not, but make it repeatable. So that's what we're going to work on. And that is a commitment, I think, from our organization to try to help on that. MWA is going to be doing that. I know IAPMO and some others we work with. We're very aware, but it hasn't happened yet. If it has happened and we haven't heard, then that's a problem in and of itself. So that's all I want to say. Anything you want to wrap up?
No, just,
Chris.
yeah, one quick, I guess one easy way to start is especially some of these, keep in mind that some of these groups are also small, right? And maybe they have the same challenges and issues as we do. And instead of fighting them, like, there's probably less governance people than us. There's less energy people. Like, how do we actually say like, hey, let's hang out. Let's you scratch my back, I scratch yours on these things. So it is very much having conversations and relationships with people who are having the same issue. So I think that's my big recommendation, I guess. And we're open to more, of course.
So just to wrap up, there's two last issues we want to talk about before we all part ways for this lunch. First off is there's an issue with lead in drinking water, and the work that's taking place to address this is on the rise, and we'd love to get you all involved. Several years ago, the WHO issued guidance on addressing lead in drinking water, and it kind of outlined all the roles that stakeholders can play, from the implementing organizations to policymakers to industry, you name it. At the UN Water Conference, the kind of a global lead-free water partnership was launched. We appreciate Aaron Salzberg and UNC for their wonderful leadership in helping to put that together. And I know there's a number of partners here in this room, MWA, World Vision, and others who have been, part of this journey. It's kind of culminated in the USAID administrator launching a war on lead, if you will, in December. And further, in September, just at the UN General Assembly, this was a lead against all sources. In September, UNICEF and WHO launched the Partnership for a Lead-Free Future, which again, we're excited about this work. UNC is a secretariat for a partnership for the work stream under this broader partnership that's going to be tackling lead in water, and we want each one of you to go and get involved. You can go to globalleadfreewater.org to learn more, or at the end of the slide, there'll be a QR code where you can express your interest. And just in this effort, there's a room for everyone, whether you're just making some simple changes in procurement or adding this, to maybe some of the governance work you're doing. There's really simple steps each one of us can take to finally kind of eradicate, lead leaching and the impacts that it has on children and pregnant women and all of us globally. The other thing that I wanted to make everyone aware of in a different vein is there has been a problem in the United States and other high-income countries where millions of Americans, more than 2 million Americans, do not have access to basic water and sanitation. And that number, by all indicators, seems to be growing. Unfortunately, the WASH sector in countries like the United States are not very well organized. They're just based on community-based organizations or others who are taking the slice of it. They don't get together at great conferences like this at UNC to talk about the problems and to share solutions. And we've been fortunate enough that there's been a couple organizations that have really stepped up, to begin to take action on that. One being Dig Deep, who really began to articulate just how big of a sector that is, and to created a database, for all the organizations working in this. They launched a new collective collaboration called the Vessel Collective, which is just talking about WASH in the United States and is meant to be a forum similar to what we have here today. If you want to get involved, please talk to Kabir. Kabir, raise your hand. Again, we'll also have a QR code for that. And also special thanks to UNC, who's hosting a WASH and high-income country day on Friday. We have the EPA administrator coming to speak, give the headline on Friday morning. So I know a lot of you, please be around, change your travel plans. We'd love to have you here. And thanks to, Vessel for actually holding its first conference in May and brought together the entire sector. And so we're excited for more opportunities like that. With that, I will share the QR codes So if you're interested in seeing a copy of today's presentation, I'll leave this up. You can get a copy of the presentation using the QR code on your left. If you're interested in just an expression of interest in getting involved with the block advocacy, or in learning more about the Vessel Collective, or in learning about the Global Lead-Free Water Partnership, you can express your interest in the other one, and we'll put you in touch with the right people. Otherwise, any closing words?
No. I thought of about 40 and I said I'm not gonna say any of them.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us for this lunch session. Appreciate your time.
And I think I also saw you pre-point
Saying that it was great. You're a unison.
everybody from WA.
Changing within like the US.
How's it going? Yeah.
From relations.
I am too. Thanks, I appreciate that. Big,
Yeah, you never know your
All the time.
Hi, nice to meet you. How are you doing?
Yeah, yeah.